Let's talk about everything that I read in the month of August with my cat Alfred. Hello, my name is Emily Crow from The Cozy Crow and welcome to my YouTube channel and welcome to this video where I'm going to talk about everything that I read in the month of August. I have quite the variety to talk to you about. Just like other videos of mine, I'm going to first talk about statistics and then I'm going to go down the list of everything that I've read, both the things I have here that I was able to get off my physical TBR, as well as the things that I had borrowed from my library that I don't have copies of. In total, I read 16 books in the month of August and I actually hit my 125th book of the year, which is really exciting. Last year, I really got back into reading as I was doing a lot of long driving for my job, and I'm still doing that driving, but that's kind of what got me back into reading. And I read 125 books in 2023. And it's really cool to think about how much my reading has grown even this year. We still have 4 months left of the year, and I already have read as much as I read in the entirety of last year. And I don't have a reading goal for this year, but it's really exciting to think about how much reading I'll get done for the rest of the year and just to take a look at the stats of what I have been reading and what I hope to read for the rest of the year. Speaking of statistics, I've got my little paper here. I hope Alfred's not distracting. He needs a little love right now, I guess, so he's just gonna hang out with me here on my lap. So for my 16 books that I read, 13 of those books I read on audio, which is pretty on par for me. I do a lot of audiobooks, not just with my long drives for work, but while I'm doing chores, while I am going on walks or exercising, while I'm driving around. I get a lot of reading in that way. I also read 1 ebook this month and I read 2 physical books. That just reflects on like where my energy level was. I didn't do a lot of reading before bed. I have also had a hard time sleeping this month. So my sleep hygiene has just been kind of like not great. Hopefully we can turn it around for the month of September. As far as the genres that I read in Alfred, he drooled on my paper. He drools when he's happy. Does anyone else's cat do that? When we first brought him home, when we adopted him, he was drooling all over the place. We had no idea that we brought home such a drool monster. He doesn't drool so much anymore, but he will still drool if he's happy. So he drooled on my paper. Okay, for the genres, I read 3 sci-fi books, which I do like sci-fi, but I don't read a lot of sci-fi, so that was kind of fun. I didn't realize I read so much sci-fi this month. I also read 5 fantasy books. I read 6 romance novels. I read 1 mystery, and I read 1 general literary fiction type of book. I definitely tend to read more romance and fantasy. Those are some heavier categories that I read, but I do read a variety, and so you tend to see a few other books here and there. And that's just the breakdown of what I read in August. I was able to get 9 books off my physical TBR, which is exciting. So there were only 7 books that I read that I didn't have physical copies of this month. And I tend to do kind of a 50-50 split. Some months I try really hard to get through my physical TBR, and other months I just read whatever comes up in my Libby holds, and it was kind of a mix of both this month. Though definitely the first half of the month was more library holds and the second half of the month was trying to get through my physical TBR because I need to read more of the books on my TBR shelf. The longest book that I read this month was Beartown by Fredrik Backman, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, but it was almost 500 pages, 496 pages long. And the shortest book that I read wasn't actually that short. This was my ebook. This was Summer's End by Juneau, and it was 265 pages long. So no novellas or anything. As far as when these books were published that I read 7 books that were published this year in 2024, which is a lot. I read 2 books that were published last year in 2023, and I read 7 books that were published prior to 2023. I kind of read a mix of more current books and some more backlist books. I get a lot of recommendations from BookTube, and so I don't branch out a ton because I like to get a lot of reviews before I read a book. So a lot of the books that I will talk about you've probably heard of if you watch other booktubers or bookstagrammers or whatnot. But the oldest book that I read was published in 1995, which is a little bit of an outlier. And that's just kind of fun to be able to read some older, more classic books too. So those are the stats that I calculated out. Let me know if you want to hear any more stats besides what I share. Let me know down below so I can include them in future videos. Let's move right into the 16 books that I read in the month of August. The first book that I finished in August was The Ministry of Time by Kaliane Bradley, and I was kind of disappointed by this book. I rated it a 2.5 star. This is a time travel historical romance novel. Now, I love genre blending books. I tend to find them really interesting, and I do tend to like books with lots of different genres mixed together, but this book, I feel like it didn't do any of those genres very well, in my personal opinion. I know some people have really enjoyed this book, but it was so slow. If I had tried to read it physically, I would have DNF'd. I did this on audiobook and it still felt so slow, and it's not a super long book either. I was really disappointed by the time travel elements. I feel like it didn't really go into any of the science of it or any reasoning behind it. We're kind of in present day time, but there is time travel. And that's kind of all that's explained. There's not a lot of science behind it. There's a little bit of like pulling people from timelines or like alternate timelines being mentioned. But in the grand scheme of this book, there's not a lot of time travel content, and there's like no science behind it, which is really disappointing because, like I said, I really do like sci-fi, and those types of elements are really interesting. So that was a letdown. The historical romance of this was like a naval officer, I think, pulled from the 1800s, an actual person in history that you can look up. Commander Gore, I think his name was. He was pulled from history. In his timeline, he would have died no matter what, and so they pulled him right before he died and like nursed him back to health. The British government was trying to equate him with the current day timeline and to kind of re-enter society. And you learn some things about why the British government decided to do this, which is kind of interesting. But his handler in the current day timeline and he kind of have a relationship, and I just saw zero chemistry. I mean, like, I knew where this story was gonna go. I saw zero chemistry. I wasn't really behind the characters. I really didn't like the female main character. She felt very bland. This book was just meh, honestly, for me. Maybe I'm rating it too high, but I could have DNF'd this book, and I wanted to see what was going on. And towards the end, it got a little bit more interesting for me, but it just wasn't for me. It didn't have enough romance and chemistry. It didn't have enough science behind the time travel. It just didn't have enough of the things I wanted, and the things that it did have were slow and bland. I did it again. I haven't rearranged my books in order of first read to last read, so let me rearrange. All right, I fixed my pile. Let's talk about the next book that I finished. This is Dreadful by Rozakis, and I think this is a debut, and I got this beautiful version from Barnes & Noble when it was like their speculative pick of the month a couple months ago, maybe. I can't remember exactly what, but this edging is like so pretty. I love it. And I was really fascinated by this book. It's a story about this guy, Gab, who wakes up with amnesia, and he is afraid. He's in this dark wizard's castle, and then he realizes he's the dark wizard. And he's trying to figure out why he lost his memory, but also he's trying to figure out who he is in relation to the him of the past that he doesn't know. It's a really funny book, lots of banter, lots of ridiculousness in this fantasy world, but also felt kind of relatable in the way that he saw the world, which is just really fun. This was a really fun romp. It did feel kind of slow in the middle of it, where it didn't feel like there was a lot of character growth or really any plot happening, but I really enjoyed the story and I enjoyed these characters. And even though the internal musings that he had may have been a little bit more on the shallow side, I feel like it fell to the tone of this book because it is a really lighthearted, funny book. And so I don't think it would have been appropriate for the author to go into more serious ideas and topics. But it was just fun to see kind of how the story played out and to get to know the characters and to just enjoy the interactions they had with one another. I definitely recommend this book. I rated it a 4.5 star. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm kind of under the weather and I'm feeling better than I have the past couple days, but I'm still a little bit congested, so I do apologize for that. The next book that I finished was The Lost World by Michael Crichton, and I am on a Michael Crichton kick. I really enjoyed reading his novels since I started by reading Dragon Teeth for the Yarnaceous Fibers book box and my vlog for that just came out on my channel as I'm filming this, so I'll make sure to link that up above and down below if you want to watch me open that box, read the book, try out the pattern, and share everything that was in the box, because it was a really fun experience. The Lost World was not my favorite of Crichton's books that I've read. I definitely enjoyed Jurassic Park a lot more, though I really liked the cast of characters in this book better. It did not have a Lex type of character, and I liked that there were distinctly good characters and distinctly bad characters. This book felt like it wasn't as nuanced. It definitely felt more inspired by the movie industry, and as I was looking into this book, it seems like Crichton wrote Jurassic Park as a standalone, and then the movie producers, they really wanted to produce another movie in this world, and so they pushed Crichton to write another book under contract so that they could make another movie. And I don't know exactly all the details or how true that is, but I could see it in the way this book is written. It definitely is written to appeal to a more commercial audience rather than containing the nuances of characters and the nuances of motivations that are in Jurassic Park. I also felt like this book was a little bit more preachy in the way that like Malcolm interacted with other people. I also felt like this book didn't have as much dread or foreboding that Jurassic Park had. In comparison, in almost every way, this book was not quite as good as Jurassic Park, though I did really like the characters, and there was some poetic justice that I also enjoyed reading about. And Sarah Harding has my heart. I think she's amazing. Girl boss. We love her, and so I really liked seeing that character flourish in this book too. I rated this a 4-star. And this is a physical book that I read, this next one. This is Mixed Signals by B.K. Borison, and I'm reading through the whole Love Light Farms series. This is the book set in summer, and these characters, Caleb has been pining for Layla basically this whole series, and so it's really fun to see them start to interact on a deeper level. Layla is the baker who works at Love Light Farms, and Caleb's one of the townspeople, and he is currently a teacher at the high school, I think. Anyway, they have been distant acquaintances because they live in the same town, but even though Caleb has totally had a crush on Layla this whole time, you start to see that Layla is noticing Caleb, and there is some fake dating involved, or like practice dating involved. And what I love about this book, rated it a 5-star, is that these characters are just so sweet, and I love their personalities, and I love their relationship, and I love how these characters fit together. I feel like I could get behind this couple the most out of all the couples in the series thus far. And it just was so heartwarming and was just really sweet and tender to read about. So if you need something that doesn't have the like miscommunication, that doesn't have like the drama, that just is about these characters like growing in their friendship and care for one another, and then also learning to love and acknowledging that love, it was just really sweet, and it was a different kind of romance. Yeah, not very suspenseful or like drama driven like others, but I really enjoyed this book. The next book that I read was Summer's End by Juneau Black, and this was the only ebook that I finished in this month. This is part of the Shady Hollow series, which is a series of mystery novels and novellas that involve a cast of woodland characters that are like solving the mysteries. They are cozy mysteries for sure. There's not a ton of like red herrings or clues or anything. It is very cozy, and it's just fun to come back to these characters. And while I feel like a cozy mystery doesn't feel like it should be in the summer, I really enjoyed this book, and this was actually my favorite of the series. I rated it a 4.5 star, and I'm feeling like maybe I should buy more of these books. I have the first one on my bookshelf, and I have really enjoyed reading all the others. I just haven't purchased physical copies. I've just done them from my library on ebook, and I think I might need to add them to my library because I've loved reading them, and I've really anticipated them every time. I love this book because it was a little bit more complex, because you got a whole new cast of characters, because the characters, that you have already learned about and know. They are chaperoning a school field trip to another area. They're seeing a historic site that kind of gives you a little bit more lore about these woodland critters and their society. And there's a whole cast of characters that could potentially be the murderer or like be involved in other nefarious things. And so that gives a lot more options with the mystery. And so the mystery element was a lot stronger in this book than in other books where it was very predictable as far as the mystery goes. This was a little bit less so, though not entirely unpredictable. It was just a fun, cozy mystery that takes place in the summertime. So this is a good read for this time of year before it starts getting cold. And while there's lots of books in the series, you don't have to read them in order necessarily. You don't really have to read them in order because there's not a lot that happens that's contiguous between all of the different books. So if you want to read this book, even though it's like the 5th one in the series, you could read it now before reading the other books. I think that's totally fine. Now, my longest book of the month, this is Beartown by Fredrik Backman. I had this book come up in my Libby holds and I didn't look into it too much. I'd read a few Fredrik Backman books before and I really enjoyed them. They were kind of a funny, slightly weird tone, very lighthearted type of books, kind of whimsical almost, I would say. And so when I heard that people really loved this book, I put it on my Libby loans. And ooh, was I blindsided. This book was not the same kind of whimsical feeling as his other books that I've read. It was definitely a more emotional, both heartbreaking and heartwarming type of a story, and this is the beginning of a series. It takes place in a hockey town called Beartown, a very, very small rural town where hockey is everything. And hockey is a driving force in the decisions these people make, in the ways they interact, in who is popular and who is not, and who makes it out of this town and who is stuck where they are living. It's almost like a toxic relationship that these people have with hockey, which is really fascinating to read about. But it leads to some really dire consequences for individuals as well as for this community as they rely so heavily on hockey and they often forget about the impact that their choices have in the name of hockey on those around them. So really interesting read if you aren't bothered by so much hockey talk, but definitely more of a winter read, and definitely check the trigger warnings. I will definitely be reading more in the series. I rated it a 4.5. I thought it was beautifully written and was really emotionally driven. And you know, sometimes you just need to feel a lot of things in a book, but it was also hard to get through. So I needed a break. Maybe when the colder months hit, I may pick the series back up again. I do recommend it, but I can see that this is not for everyone. Make sure you're in the right space to read this book. The next book that I read on audio was Love and Gelato by Jenna Welch. And I had been looking forward to reading this book. The covers are really, really cute in this little YA romance series, but I don't often buy romances in the YA section because they just don't hit the same way and they're not something I necessarily want on my shelf. And so I wanted to try it out on Libby first, and I'm really glad that I did. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, though it is definitely a YA romance. The characters are a little immature. The relationship is a little insta-lovey, though you can definitely see some chemistry there. The timeline of this book is really succinct, which I think also took away from the romance a little bit. This book is set in Italy. What's the main character's name? I don't even remember. I'm so bad at remembering names. The main female character, her mother has passed away, and her mother's dying wish was that this girl, who is maybe like 16, goes to live with her father in Italy. And this is news to her. She's like, what father? You've been a single mom my whole life. Thanks for dropping this on me. Does he even want me? How come I don't know him yet? What's going on? But she moves to Italy after her mother passes to live with him and to get to know him. There's some tension in that relationship, not from his side, but from her side for sure, which is a little bit immature, especially because I would love to go to Italy. If I had long-lost family in Italy, I would love that. But I do not, alas. And I loved how the setting was written about. It really made me feel like I was transported to Italy, and I love that about this book. There was also kind of this overarching plot that was almost a little bit stronger than the romance itself, where the main character is trying to learn more about her mother, as well as how she came to be, like her parents' relationships. and why her mother didn't maintain that relationship with her father when this girl was born and moved back to the States. And she's just trying to figure out what her mother's motivations are, what happened in Italy for her mother. And so she's trying to follow along on that path as she's reading her mother's old journal, and she's learning things. Now, it's kind of predictable, but it's also cute to see her learn all of these things, even if she was a little bit slow on the uptake mentally, even though I totally knew what was happening early on. It was just a fun, quick read that was really, really cute, and I would love to read more from this series. And I've heard that the Love and Olives book, which I think is the third one, is usually people's favorite. So I'm excited to read that in the future. Not sure if I'll read it before maybe next summer. It might be a good time to get back into the series. I rated this a 4-star because I did really enjoy it, and I liked that it wasn't super romance heavy. I liked that there was another plot, and I liked the setting a lot. And I did enjoy these characters, even if there were some things I might have changed about the way the characters interacted and their maturity level and how the mystery all played out, because it wasn't really a mystery to me. Overall, I found this cute and a really interesting blend of romance and plot that you don't often get in like a YA romance. So that was just a fun read. If you've been watching for a few months, you know that I've really loved the Caraval series by Stephanie Garber. This is a YA fantasy romance type of a series, and I finished that series recently and got started on the next series, the Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I really enjoyed this book, like probably more than all of the Caraval books. I rated this a 4.5 star, and the reason that I like this book more, I think, is because the main character, Evangeline, she's still the same age as the Dragna sisters in the Caraval series. She's, you know, that older teenager age, but not quite an adult yet. I really like that you see her flaws and her immaturity in her age, right? She's very age appropriate, but when she realizes the mistakes she's making or the things that she did wrong, or she realizes ways she can maybe fix mistakes that she's made, she works really hard to try to fix her mistakes and to try to make things better and make things right for those around her. And I really love that depth in her character, and you could see how loyal she was in trying to make things better. And even when she was kind of cornered, at the end of this book, you see that she is cornered. She's still trying her best to make things better for others, which is really cool. And I like that about her, that she has some flaws, but she definitely also has some strengths that I appreciated. You're delving more into this magical world. You are seeing more of Jax from the first trilogy, and you see some mistakes Evangeline makes and how she kind of gets herself into a hole as she's interacting with the fates. I like that you saw more of these fates and more of this magic. There's definitely still these sinister elements, and I'm really excited to see where this series goes, as it's introduced a really big plot point that is going to be carried throughout this trilogy that goes beyond Evangeline and her personal struggles. I'm really excited to dive in and continue this series. I have my list over here of the books I read, so if I'm looking over there to remember names, that is why. The next book I read was Off the Beaten Path by Madison, Wright, and this was a romance novel that came out this year that I didn't have any concept of. I don't think I've heard anyone talk about it. It doesn't have a lot of ratings on Storygraph, and I think I just stumbled upon it on Libby as I was kind of scrolling things, and I decided to pick it up. I rated it a 3.75 star. This is a small town romance, grumpy sunshine, single dad type of romance. And while the beginning of this book was not quite hitting for me, I would say the last like 60 or 70% of this book I really enjoyed. These two characters are neighbors and they don't like each other. And that's something I just couldn't get behind, like why he was so annoyed at her and also why she was being so annoying. Like I just didn't quite understand the tension between them as neighbors, but they come to find out that they've actually been messaging each other for the past few months via a dating app. And so those relationships kind of collide and they're trying to like reestablish their equilibrium in relation to one another, which is really an interesting concept. But I really loved when they decided to be friendly, to be more kind to one another. And then as they progressed from kind neighbors through being friends, through really caring about each other, through falling in love and being more involved in each other's lives. I really love that progression in the last like 70% of the book. And I really loved the main male character's daughter, June. For some reason I remember her name, I don't know why, but she was adorable. She was 6 years old, and I just loved her character and how her character served to shine a light on both her dad and this neighbor. And you saw the stark differences in their personalities, but also how they kind of fit together well and complemented each other well. And you could see how this relationship was gonna work with them all becoming a family one day. You know, you want the romance to work out, right? And so I just loved what that did for the relationship and for the main characters. I just feel like this author did a really great job at having like a single parent trope in this book. I really appreciated the balance that having June brought to this. I also really liked that even though some things got a little messy with like an ex-wife being in the story a little bit, all the characters handled it really maturely, and there was a little bit more depth than I anticipated from this book. So honestly, like, if the first like 50 pages of this book had been written differently, this could have been a really amazing story. But like, I had a hard time getting into it because I just was not feeling the conflict of the relationship. I also felt like the ending of this book was a little bit too picture perfect, and everything wrapped up really nicely in a way that was a little bit outlandish isn't the right word, but a little bit unbelievable. And while the rest of the book, except for the beginning, was very believable for me, it felt a little bit out there as far as like a conclusion for the big conflict at the end of the book. I also liked this didn't have a third act conflict in the relationship itself. It was a conflict outside of the relationship, and I liked how that had impacted the relationship, and you got to see the characters grow through that kind of experience. So I definitely recommend this book. I would love to read more from this author because I feel like there's a lot of potential here that I could read my next favorite romance from this author if they write in the future. The next book that I read was an audiobook, and this was Reckless by Lauren Roberts. I have the Barnes & Noble exclusive edition because I really liked the colors of this cover better than the original cover. I'm sure if you have heard of this book, you've also heard that it's kind of a letdown. I rated this a 3-star. I adored Powerless. I rated that a 4.75 star. This book fell very short for me. It's not a small book. It's not a large book either. But this book felt so slow because it's all about the characters and there's hardly any plot. And anytime anything interesting happened with the plot, you'd be like, oh, something cool is gonna happen, like a kidnapping or a plot or like a rebellion. You thought something might happen. Nope, nothing happened. It literally was just these two characters falling back into each other's lives. The very last chapter of this book was the lead up into the third book. This book you could almost skip before reading the third book and get like a 3-sentence summary on what happened in this book. I really didn't like that it had zero plot because the first book had tons of different like plot points happening. The author could have done so much with creating more backstory, more characters, a grander world with this book. I was kind of disappointed in that. It definitely focused on the characters, but I also feel like the character growth was lacking for me. There was a lot of tension at the beginning of the book in this relationship, and I really loved feeling that tension. But then the tension just kind of, instead of being resolved, it just kind of fell away, if that makes sense. And that wasn't very satisfying to read. I really wish that there would have been more explanation, more insight in especially Kai's mind as his perceptions were changing, that you could have seen more of that rather than hear Hayden's point of view as she saw him acting different. It just like wasn't a great fit for me, honestly. I'm excited for the next book. I really hated this ending, honestly. I saw it coming. It was very predictable, but also I really hated it, and we didn't get any explanation for why that ending was the direction it was going. Maybe a 3-star was too high, but I really do like the characters a lot, and I'm excited to read the next book. But I just didn't understand. I just didn't understand the ending. I didn't understand the purpose of this book, why it was written at this length for the purpose that it set out to do. I just feel like it wasn't a great execution, and there could have been a lot more in this book than what the author gave us. So kind of disappointed. We'll see how the last book in this trilogy does. The next book that I read was on audio, and this is Ink Blood Sister Scribe by Emma Törzs. I don't know exactly how to pronounce that. Törzs with the umlaut maybe. And I rated this a 4.5 star. I really enjoyed this. I think this is a debut novel by her, and this is in the fantasy realm. I really enjoyed this book. It was exceptionally slow in the beginning, and I think this is because I didn't really know where the story was going. There was a lot of character deposition at the very beginning of the story as you're switching between characters and learning more about them. They all had a very distinct voice and background, and it was really interesting to read, but I just didn't know where the story was going. And the plot that was included on the back cover, you didn't really get to the progress in the plot until you're like halfway through the book. And so yeah, it was just a little bit of a slow start. This book involves book and blood magic, which is really fascinating to read about. There are certain people that can be scribes, certain people that can do magic, certain people that can interact with magic. It was just like really fascinating to read about. There was some deeper topics with like betrayal and like interesting relationships between characters, and the characters trying to navigate relationships that they have had. And so it was just really interesting to see like this cast of characters individually and then see them all come together later on in the book to try to, you know, fulfill the purpose that they were trying to set out to do, to kind of, you know, protect the world type of thing. It was a grander type of purpose than any of them individually, but it had personal implications for them. So there were definitely some higher stakes that they were addressing. Like I said, I like this book. The plot itself and the plot devices felt a little bit maybe naive. Like it felt a little formulaic as far as the book goes. Like it wasn't exceedingly original in the way this story was told, but I really liked the world building of it, and I really liked the characters and all the things that you saw. So I really liked this book. I could see the author writing a sequel about what these characters will do as it relates to the magic, but I could also see the author moving on to something totally unrelated. Anyway, I feel like this was a really good book. It was a nice, like, cozier fantasy with some higher stakes set in a modern day world with some like ancient secret blood magic type of magic system. Right, the next book that I read was The Rulebook by Sarah Adams, and this is the second book in the cheat sheet series. There's currently 2 books out. This book came out this year? End of last year? I think it was this year. This is Derek's story, and I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of Derek in the cheat sheet, so I kind of put off reading this book, but I actually like this book more than I thought I would. I rated this a 4.5 star. The beginning of this book started off kind of iffy, and I think the thing that bugged me the most is that towards the beginning, all of Derek's friends on his football team like barged into his house, because that's the kind of relationship they have. But then they started going on and on about how he needed to be in a relationship to find happiness. He needed true love. His life was incomplete without marriage. And I really did not like that narrative. That really bothered me because marriage is not necessarily for everyone and there's no rush to get married. Anyway, I have feelings about that. It just bothered me how much that narrative was pushed at the very beginning. Thankfully, they didn't talk about it too much after that. I think it was just framing the story and that like he was the only one that wasn't in a serious relationship and everyone else was. But I wasn't a huge fan of how that started out. And I really didn't like how Derek was being connected with a new agent for maybe his final season, like his last hurrah. He had a potentially career-ending injury in the season prior. And so he really needed to like up his public image and also do really well on the football team so that he could keep his spot. Come to find out, his new agent is his ex-girlfriend from college. Second chance romance. I really loved, I think her name was Nora? Yeah, I really loved Nora as a character. I love seeing her growth personally. I wasn't as much of a fan of Derek, especially because he was being a huge jerk and was being really cruel, honestly, to Nora to try to get her to quit as an agent. Once they kind of came to an equilibrium as far as their relationship went, they were able to move on and become more friendly and like get along better. And I really liked seeing how they started talking about what went wrong in their relationship in college and how they would respect each other more in the present day and move forward in their relationship with one another, not like necessarily romantic relationship, but how they would be better toward one another rather than like being selfish in their desires. It just took a long time for them to get to that point of being mature. So it wasn't my favorite in that sense, but I really liked for that like second half of the book where Derek started being more mature, that you got to see a lot of character growth and you got to see them fall in love with one another again and really prioritize one another in their relationship. I also really liked Nora's voice and Nora's strong motivations in this book. I think Nora was the shining star of this. Derek turned out okay in the end, though for the first half of the book, I wasn't really a fan of him. Now we're really getting through this stack of books from my TBR. Lots in a row as I'm finishing up the month. This is A Reaper at the Gates. This is by Sabaa Tahir, and this is the third book in the An Ember in the Ashes series, and 5-star series. Oh my goodness. 5-star book. I love it. There's so many like heart-wrenching things, and you are on the edge of your seats. It is emotionally fraught. You don't know how things are going to turn out for these characters. People are dying, chaos is happening, rebellion, war. There's a lot of political intrigue as well in this. It is a beautifully written series. I really like the writing style, and I like how this is different and deeper than other YA fantasies that I've read. I think it's really something special, and I definitely recommend. I am gearing up to read the 4th and final book in the series because I know that a companion series that Sabaa Tahir is writing, the first book, Air, is coming out really soon. I think it's like the next generation after this generation. And I want to be able to read Air, so I need to finish the series even though I am terrified for what I'm going to encounter emotionally. The next book that I finished was Leather and Lark by Brynne Weaver, and this is in the Butcher and Blackbird series. They are some dark romances. They're like morbidly funny. They're about serial killers, often with good intentions, like killing other serial killer type of thing. But there's some really like gruesome and gory descriptions in here. They ruined pizza in this book. In the last book, they ruined cookies and cream ice cream. There's definitely some laugh out loud moments, and also, yeah, some morbidly gross and disturbing things. So if you like morbid humor, you might enjoy this type of a book. I rated this a 4-star. I did not like this as much as Butcher and Blackbird. I think I just didn't like, it's a marriage of convenience trope. I really didn't like seeing how much they hated each other and then they ended up getting married for convenience or like, you know, to save their friends, blah, blah, blah. They had good reasons apparently, but I just couldn't get behind the motivations that these characters had. I just don't really like the marriage of convenience trope anyway, usually, and so I wasn't as much of a fan of this book because of how that came to be. But once you got past like them hating each other and marriage of convenience and it being super awkward for the first like week, after that when they just started being roommates and then being friends and then caring about one another and then becoming lovers, like that progression, once they were roommates tolerating each other, I really liked that part of the story. I also didn't really like how, honestly, a lot of this plot kind of mirrored the first book in like the types of tensions that there were. There was like another serial killer introduced, and so that wasn't like my favorite. And I honestly just feel like these books are way too spicy for me. I like don't really enjoy them, and I did this on audiobook and that kind of made me uncomfortable. It was one of those like duet audiobooks where all the girl voices are in one narrator and all the boy voices are in another narrator, and like for the spicy scenes it just got like really intense and I like didn't like it. I don't know, it just kind of made me uncomfortable. So if you really like super spicy stuff, you might really like that about this, but I did not as much. So I'll probably read the 3rd book still. There's things that I definitely like about this series, but there's also things that just like aren't perfect for me. Penultimate book that I read this month, this was Network Effect by Martha Wells, and this is the first Murderbot novel. I've read all the novellas before this book. So this is the 5th one in the series. This is a novel. You get to see Murderbot interact with the humans that it has come to know and care about begrudgingly, even though it doesn't want to admit it. I really like Murderbot as a character, their sassiness, their snark, their social anxiety. I love everything about Murderbot. This book though was like a little bit long for me, and I don't know if it's just because I'm used to the novellas, but I also feel like the pacing for the first half of this book was really slow. Like I didn't really know where the story was going. I also felt like there was way too much computery talk. And this is sci-fi, it's hard sci-fi, but compared to the other novellas, like this just was more focused on like killware and like software stuff and like all sorts of things that like was just really hard to read. Kind of hurt my brain a little bit to wrap my brain around those types of conversations that were happening. So I liked it when it was not talking about those as much and was more interacting with other people and other cultures and like other cruise ships and like the action scenes and things like that. I don't know. So I rated this a 4.5 star because there's lots of things I loved about this, but also it wasn't my favorite. It was my least favorite Murderbot, but we'll see if the next book, which is more novella length, is one that is more my speed, and maybe Murderbot is just about its novellas for me. I'm not sure, but I still really loved this book. It just took me a lot longer to get through because of the pacing, and it was a little hard to read the computery talk. Okay, the very last book I have to share, and then I'm gonna pick up my daughter from daycare. This is like a 6-star romance for me, and I haven't had one of these in a long time, and I hate how people say 6-star books, but honestly, this just blew every other book out of the water that I read this month. It was exactly what I needed to read. This is Out on a Limb by Hannah Bonam-Young, and this book was recently traditionally published, hence this cover. I know that there was some really cute indie covers, but I did not get on the bandwagon in time for those. They've been republished now. This book has some amazing limb difference representation. Both these characters have limb differences, and you see the amazing chemistry as they meet one another at a Halloween party that their friends are hosting, and you just see them really grow. And like, unlike any other book that has a one-night stand, I was very convinced about their chemistry and their interactions with one another. I was so on board for them to get to know each other better. They had a one-night stand, and come to find out, she gets pregnant. You find that out on the back cover, but you get to see their relationship grow from respectfully having chemistry and like knowing each other from basically strangers, but trying to be present as co-parents in this baby's life, to seeing their relationship grow and then becoming roommates and friends and truly caring about each other and falling in love before they're actually in a relationship. And it was just so tender and sweet. And I was 100% convinced, 1000% convinced of their chemistry for one another from the beginning all the way to their love and like how their relationship is gonna last in the future. And through the lens of building a life for their child, it was just beautiful. I loved it. These characters are amazing people that I love and admire, but they also have flaws and are very real. And it was just, honestly, it was so perfect. I love this book and I cannot recommend it enough. And that was my favorite book of the month, if you couldn't tell. I need to get going, but thank you so much for joining me as I shared the 16 books that I read in the month of August. And if you want to learn more about maybe my TBR, maybe I'll post a YouTube short about it or something on my Instagram, so make sure to follow me down below, either by subscribing, hitting the bell notification, or checking me out on Instagram, because I would love to have you there too. And let me know what kind of books you're reading recently. Have you read any of these books? Is there something you would recommend to me? I would love to hear. Make sure to comment down below and let me know. Until next time, happy reading. Bye.